By August of 1944, the Allied breakout from Normandy had become a torrent, shattering German defenses across France. At its vanguard was General George Patton's Third Army, a mechanized force advancing with unprecedented velocity. 30, 40, sometimes 50 miles a day. But this stunning success concealed a burgeoning crisis. The Army was outrunning its own lifeblood. Every Sherman tank consumed 5 gallons of fuel per mile. Each infantry division demanded a staggering 650 tons of supplies daily. Ammunition, rations, and parts all had to be funneled to the crippled port of Cherbourg, which had handled only a fraction of a need. With the major port of Antwerp months from being operational, every bullet and every can of beans had to be hauled 350 miles overland from the Normandy beaches, across a landscape of roads cratered by retreating Germans. At Supreme Headquarters, the numbers on the logistics charts foretold disaster. Patton's armor was literally running out of gas, with some tank battalions completely immobilized not by enemy action but by empty fuel tanks. On August 21st, the gravity of the situation crystallized when Colonel Frank Ross, Chief of Transportation, briefed General Eisenhower. Ross reported that nearly a quarter of all supplies, 23%, were being lost en route to accidents, breakdowns, and enemy attacks. The strategic dilemma was absolute. If Patton halted, the Wehrmacht would regroup and reinforce. If he pressed on, his army would collapse from starvation. Eisenhower, staring at the map, saw the window to end the war by Christmas rapidly closing. He dismissed the proposed weeks-long overhaul of the supply system. The Wehrmacht was in retreat. Give them time, and the Siegfried Line would become a fortress for a brutal winter war. His command to his officers was unequivocal. I need solutions in days, gentlemen, not months. As the meeting at headquarters adjourns with no resolution, 90 miles away, Technical Sergeant Raymond Kowalski confronts the brutal consequences of that indecision from the cab of his GMC Jimmy. The 34-year-old surveys the grim aftermath of a Luftwaffe strafing run. 8 trucks, overturned and smoldering, their vital supplies strewn across a narrow French road. Kowalski was a long-haul trucker from Pittsburgh before the war, a man with no college degree or military pedigree. Only 15 years of experience hauling steel through Pennsylvania's mountains in every conceivable condition. Drafted in '43 and given mere 2 weeks of driver training, he now watches good men die because command fails to grasp the fundamental physics of trucking. He lights a cigarette, the words of his old dispatcher echoing in his mind. Convoys are for show. Profits are in the spacing. The official doctrine for this massive supply effort, codenamed the Red Ball Express, dictated safety in numbers. Convoys of 20 or more vehicles were to travel in tight formation, 60 yards apart, at a maximum of 25 miles per hour. Yet in the past 2 weeks, every one of the 6 convoys Kowalski has driven has suffered casualties. He understands the problem isn't merely the German air attacks. It is the doctrine itself. 20 trucks bunched together create a target visible for miles. When enemy aircraft are spotted, procedure demands the entire column halt, trapping every vehicle in a perfect stationary kill zone. But then on August 23rd, a 6-hour delay at a depot introduces a new variable. As some trucks are loaded faster than others, a few impatient drivers decide not to wait. A stark contrast was emerging on the roads of a European theater. While independent drivers departed as soon as their cargo was secured, operating without coordination, every single one reached the Ford supply dump. The official, organized convoy that driver Kowalski eventually joined was not so fortunate, losing 3 trucks to a German FW-90 attack. This discrepancy sparked an observation. Kowalski began meticulously tracking the pattern. Lone trucks, or those in pairs, spread out over hours, presented a nearly impossible targeting problem for the Luftwaffe. Attacking a single vehicle was a poor expenditure of fuel and ammunition. A convoy, however, was a target worth the risk. He distilled the brutal calculus of aerial warfare into a simple truth. A convoy of 20 trucks was a single target, but 20 individual trucks were 20 separate, costly hunting missions for an enemy with finite aircraft, fuel, and pilots. Kowalski's notebook filled with the grim data. Official convoys were hemorrhaging material and men, averaging a 23% loss rate from attacks, accidents, and breakdowns. The handful of independents he tracked suffered losses of less than 3%. On August 25th, he brought this ground truth analysis to his company commander, Captain Dennis Hayes. "Sir," he proposed, "I think I know how to cut our supply losses by 90%. Hayes saw not an innovator, but subordinate out of his depth, a man in dusty coveralls with oil-stained hands. His reply would become infamous in the annals of military logistics. "Kowalski, you're a goddamn truck driver. Leave the tactics to people who went to West Point." The institutional rejection was swift. Hayes forwarded the proposal up the chain, recommending its dismissal. The response from battalion headquarters was immediate and absolute, citing that convoy procedures were based on established doctrine. Individual vehicle operations, the memo read, create communication gaps, eliminate mutual support, and violate tactical protocol. Proposal denied. Kowalski read the words with a bitter laugh. While staff officers lectured him on vehicle operations, he resolved not to give up. On August 27th, he sought out a different audience. Lieutenant Colonel Martin Burgess, the Deputy Operations Officer for the division within the Transportation Corps, Sergeant Kowalski's radical proposal was met with a rigid skepticism of command. His superior, a Captain Burgess, listened patiently before dismissing the idea out of hand. The logic of the convoy was sacrosanct. To send a truck out alone was to risk stranding a driver in hostile territory, a lone target for bypass German units still operating behind the lines. "This isn't a peacetime trucking company," Burgess asserted. "This is military operations." But Kowalski countered with a devastating statistic. The supposedly safe convoys were already losing a quarter of their supplies. The official system was failing. The backlash from his peers was even more severe. At a driver's briefing on August 28th, Kowalski's attempt to present his data was shouted down by fellow sergeants. To them, it was a suicidal fantasy, an attempt to get men killed separately instead of together. The word spread to the motor pools. Kowalski had a death wish, a desire to play cowboy on French roads while the Luftwaffe was still a threat. He was ostracized by his own squad. Yet in the shadows, 3 men quietly voiced their support. Private First Class James Booker, a former Detroit auto worker, Corporal Eddie Martinez, and Private Willie Jackson. They had seen the same inefficiencies and were willing to volunteer. Their support, however, would prove inconsequential. On August 29th, the proposal reached the desk of Colonel Ross. His verdict was swift and absolute, scrawled across the top of the report. Denied. The memo was a chilling final word, prohibiting any unauthorized deviation from convoy protocol and threatening any driver who disobeyed with court-martial. For Raymond Kowalski, the official army had spoken. His idea was dead, except someone else had been reading the reports. In the waning days of August 1944, sleep offered little respite for Lieutenant General Walter Bedell Smith, Eisenhower's famously exacting chief of staff. The Allied advance, so spectacular since the breakout from Normandy, was grinding to a halt, not before German guns, but due to a logistical crisis of catastrophic proportions. General Patton's Third Army was immobilized, its tanks starved of fuel. The British 21st Army Group was forced to ration ammunition. The window to deliver a knockout blow to the reeling Wehrmacht was closing, strangled by the very supply lines meant to sustain it. Smith, an officer whose meticulousness was legendary, dug through mountains of reports for a solution, sifting through after-action reports from truck companies, casualty statistics from the Red Ball Express, and finally, a disregarded proposal from a sergeant in Pennsylvania. On August 30th, Smith strode into the office of a Colonel Ross. He demanded to know why the proposal from a truck driver, a Sergeant Kowalski, advocating for individual dispatch, had been rejected. Ross, caught off guard, cited fundamental convoy doctrine. Smith's voice, it was said, could cut steel. He had read the doctrine. He wanted to know why following it was resulting in the loss of a quarter of their supplies. When Ross explained that casualties were within expected parameters, Smith's patience shattered. General Patton's army was paralyzed because of expected parameters. He ordered the sergeant brought to him at once. 2 hours later, Sergeant Raymond Kowalski stood before Lieutenant General and 3 full colonels. Still in diesel-stained coveralls and unshaven, he was certain his military career was over. Smith wasted no time. "Sergeant, explain your method. Assume I know nothing about trucking." Kowalski, taking a breath, laid out the brutally simple logic. The Germans couldn't attack what they couldn't predict. The current system of sending large convoys at scheduled intervals made them easy prey for the Luftwaffe, who knew their routes and timetables. Pulling out a battered notebook, he proposed a radical alternative: load trucks as they arrived and dispatch them immediately, one by one, at staggered intervals. Instead of a single, vulnerable target of 20 trucks, the enemy would face 20 individual trucks spread across the French countryside, a logistical shell game they could never win. In the tense atmosphere of the command briefing, Colonel Ross interjected with the practical objections of a seasoned officer. What about vehicle breakdowns or attacks by bypassed enemy units? The proposed solution was the same as the current one: escort jeeps on patrol. But as the counter-argument went, one disabled vehicle would no longer halt 19 others. And while a German ambush might destroy a single, independent truck, a conventional convoy presented a target of 20. The room fell silent as the commanding officer, Smith, studied the figures Sergeant Kowalski had compiled. The contrast was stark. Conventional convoys were suffering 23% losses, while the few trucks dispatched independently had a loss rate of only 3%. Ross dismissed it as anecdotal evidence, a statistical fluke from a dangerously small sample. But Smith's decision was immediate. He authorized Sergeant Kowalski to run a trial operation. 1 week, 20 trucks dispatched under his new method. The benchmark for success was clear. If losses dropped below 10%, the system would be implemented across the line. As Ross's face flushed with anger, Smith asserted his command. "If this fails," he stated, "I'll take responsibility. But if it works, and we didn't try it, that failure is mine, too." Turning to the sergeant, he concluded, "You've got your chance. Don't waste it." On September 1st, 1944, at the bustling Alassa Supply Depot, that chance became a reality. For Kowalski, the stakes were absolute. Failure meant dead countrymen in the stockade. Success could save thousands of lives. The traditional convoy doctrine was a study in methodical inefficiency. All 20 trucks would wait, often for 4 to 6 hours, until every vehicle was loaded. They would then depart together, a lumbering formation held at 25 miles per hour, with 60 yards between them. The journey to the forward dumps took 14 hours, making the total time from depot arrival to delivery nearly a full day. Kowalski's method shattered this orthodoxy. When the first truck finished loading at 0600 hours, it was dispatched immediately. You're gone. Route 7, standard speed, independent operation. The second truck was ready at 0618. Go. The third at 0633. Go. Instead of a single massive convoy departing at noon, Kowalski had created a continuous flow of material, dispatching his 20 trucks over a 5-hour period. These individual vehicles, now spread across 90 miles of road, could travel at speeds optimal for conditions, transforming a vulnerable, concentrated target into a fluid, resilient lifeline. Technical Sergeant Raymond Kowalski's directive was a flagrant violation of military doctrine. In place of the mandatory 25-mile-per-hour convoy crawl, he empowered his experienced drivers with a simple, pragmatic order: run what's safe. This heresy to the Transportation Corps meant that if a road could handle 40 miles per hour, they were to drive 40. Official observers were aghast. Colonel Ross's deputy meticulously logged the infractions: exceeding speed limits, a complete lack of convoy organization, individual vehicles operating independently in a combat zone. But as the reports of violations flowed in, they were accompanied by astonishing results. The first truck reached the 3rd Army Depot at 1830 hours, a journey of just 12.5 hours, a full 90 minutes faster than the convoy average. By the next morning, all 20 trucks had delivered their cargo. The tally was remarkable: 0 losses, 0 enemy attacks, and 1 minor breakdown, a flat tire, changed by the driver himself without delaying anyone. Even when the Luftwaffe spotted 3 trucks, the new tactic proved its worth. Intercepting a single, fast-moving vehicle was an inefficient use of a fighter plane. 2 pilots declined to engage, and a third made one unsuccessful strafing run before returning to base. The evidence became undeniable. Day 2 saw one accident, a 5% loss rate, but it was a single vehicle, not the multi-truck pileups that plagued convoys. Day 3, 0 losses. By day 5, even the most skeptical colonels were staring at the statistics in disbelief. Kowalski's method had cut supply losses from 23% to under 3%, a staggering 90% reduction. On September 7th, General Smith issued the landmark order. All Red Ball Express operations would immediately adopt the staggered individual dispatch protocols. The transformation was swift. By mid-September, the entire 6,000-truck fleet had abandoned traditional convoys, with depots now dispatching vehicles in continuous, around-the-clock stream that fundamentally changed the pace of the Allied advance. The vulnerable, mass formations of the past were abandoned. In their place, a constant, staggered stream of individual trucks departed every 3 to 5 minutes. The results of this tactical revolution were immediate and profound. During the final 8 weeks of the Red Ball Express, from September through November, supply losses plummeted to a mere 2.7%, while delivery speeds increased by a remarkable 32%. The volume of material reaching Patton's Third Army and other frontline units more than doubled. This new reality was not lost on the enemy. German after-action reports captured their growing sense of impotence. In an October dispatch, one Luftwaffe squadron commander wrote, "Allied supply trucks now operate with no predictable pattern. Individual vehicle interdiction is ineffective use of limited air resources. Recommend focusing fighter operations on tactical ground support rather than logistics harassment." The Americans, through Kowalski's method, had rendered the practice of truck hunting a strategic impossibility for the overstretched German Air Force. Every fighter sent to chase a lone truck was one less aircraft available to counter Allied bomber streams or aid beleaguered ground troops, a tactical trade-off the Wehrmacht could no longer afford. The impact transcended statistics. In its 82 days of operation, the reorganized Red Ball Express delivered a colossal 412,193 tons of supplies, enough ammunition, fuel, and equipment to sustain the advance of 6 Allied armies across France. For Patton's Third Army alone, this logistical miracle provided enough fuel to motor from the shores of Normandy to the very border of Germany. While historians debate whether combat prowess or logistical superiority ultimately won the war in Europe, the truth is that one made the other possible. Kowalski's system made Allied logistics sustainable, and its genius quickly spread. By November, the staggered dispatch method was being adopted across all Allied theaters, with the British Eighth Army in Italy reporting similar successes and planners in the Pacific studying its application for island-hopping campaigns. The most telling evidence, however, came not from Allied reports, but from the enemy. In late October, when a captured German staff officer near Aachen was interrogated about Allied supply operations, he could only shake his head in. The enemy's frustration was palpable. Captured in an intelligence report that crossed the desk of the Supreme Allied Commander himself. "We can't target what we can't predict," a German officer lamented. "Your trucks are like ghosts now. Everywhere and nowhere. We stopped even trying to intercept them. It's a waste of fuel we don't have." Recognizing the profound strategic impact of this grassroots innovation, Dwight D. Eisenhower circled the quote and wrote a note to his chief of staff, Walter Bedell Smith. "This sergeant's method is forcing the Germans to concede the logistics battle. Recommend formal recognition." That recognition came on November 18, 1944, 2 days after the Red Ball Express officially ceased operations. Technical Sergeant Raymond Kowalski received the Bronze Star Medal for exceptional meritorious service. The citation specifically highlighted his innovative tactical logistics methods that significantly reduced supply losses and enhanced operational effectiveness. After the war, Kowalski returned to Pittsburgh in 1946 and to his old job driving a truck. There were no book deals or speaking tours, only the quiet legacy of a Bronze Star in a drawer. Yet, the military establishment did not forget. In 1947, the U.S. Army Transportation Corps formally adopted staggered dispatch protocols as official doctrine. The method became required teaching at the Transportation School at Fort Lee, Virginia, where every new logistics officer would learn about the Pittsburgh truck driver who rewrote convoy theory. From the Korean War and the Berlin airlift to Vietnam, Desert Storm, and the conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan, variations of Kowalski's principle have been a cornerstone of American logistics. Modern convoys, guided by GPS and satellite communications, no longer mass into vulnerable formations, but disperse with unpredictable timing and routes, all stemming from the core concept: make the enemy's interdiction effort economically and tactically inefficient. The strategic footprint of modern logistics owes its design to what Raymond Kowalski first calculated in a simple notebook while watching convoys burn. Civilian trucking and the global supply chain absorbed the lesson. The just-in-time delivery systems, staggered scheduling, and distributed warehouse networks of today all trace their intellectual lineage to a single hard-won insight. Bunching creates vulnerability. Spacing creates resilience. Corporations like Amazon, FedEx, and UPS now dispatch vehicles continuously, a method more efficient, scalable, and harder to disrupt than scheduled waves. They are, whether they know it or not, using a system forged on the battlefields of World War II. In 2003, this legacy was enshrined when the U.S. Army Transportation Museum at Fort Lee opened an exhibit on the Red Ball Express. A section is dedicated to Kowalski. There is notebook, filled with the grim mathematics of convoy losses, sits in a display case. Beside it, a photograph captures him by his GMC Jimmy truck, cigarette in hand, the image of a working-class driver who understood his profession more profoundly than the experts. The placard reads, "Sometimes the best innovations come not from commanders or theorists, but from the people actually doing the job." Kowalski died in 1983 at age 73. His obituary in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette noted his Bronze Star, but offered no explanation for how he earned it. He was remembered as a retired truck driver, a veteran, a quiet man. Yet, his work is foundational. In every military logistics course, in every dissertation on World War II supply operations, and in every analysis of the Allied advance across Europe, there's a footnote to the sergeant who proved that a radical idea can simply be the truth. His method didn't just cut supply losses by 90%. It fundamentally changed how the modern world moves everything, from military hardware to consumer packages. It is a system still used, still saving lives, all because one driver from Pittsburgh refused to accept that there was only one way to run a convoy.